What's going on? Dylan Conrad, Metabolic AF. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about how to structure your macros around your menstrual cycle. Before I get into that, if you're watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe, turn notifications on, Spotify, iTunes, hit that bell button, leave a review, I'll see algo. So how to structure your macros around your menstrual cycle. This is something I have been chatting a lot about with my clients. We've been doing for years, and that is aligning macronutrients, protein, carbon, fat, to match up the actual menstrual cycle. So the reason I wanted to get into this is because there's an easy way to negate a lot of the effects that are happening, negative effects that are happening from the menstrual cycle. For example, second half, and I'm going to cover this a little more in depth, but the second half of your menstrual cycle, the luteal phase, which I covered yesterday on the structuring your strength training hit and cardio around your menstrual cycle, you're more insulin resistant, like I was talking about the other day. Now, if you can decrease your carbohydrates, which is a macronutrient, you can actually increase the insulin sensitivity there to offset that insulin resistance. Insulin resistance, basically, just to bastardize it a little bit, it's when you're consuming carbohydrates, you're storing them as fat instead of energy, right? So I wanted to go through this with you and really just it's so important to really understand the menstrual cycle in relation to your diet and exercise. To really maximize your results. Like, guys, they're freaking easy. They're really easy. They don't have all these hormonal things going on. They don't have menstrual cycles. There's no hormonal IUDs, the menopause phases. It's a lot harder for women to lose weight on the same diet as a man. So you need something very specific, very different than a man. And that's why it's so important to really understand the science and understand the application of matching up your menstrual cycle with your actual macronutrients. Okay, so that's what I'm gonna cover. And this really is to give you some actionable tips and just help an overall structure of your macronutrient intake to increase your energy, to better your mood, and obviously to better your fat loss results. That is the main thing, the fat loss results, right? It's what we care about most. So understand the menstrual cycle. So I talked about this the other day, but we have the menstrual phase. Well, okay, so we have the follicular phase, which is day 1 from onset of period to about day 14. Right, when I say normal cycle, that's between 24 to 32 days. But when we are looking at the first follicular phase, quote unquote, that first 14 days, there's actually a menstrual phase in there. That's when you're bleeding, okay? So that's when the actual follicular phase does start. All right. Now, the ovulatory phase, that's around day 14. That's when you ovulate. If you've tried to conceive and you ever had any issues and you got your body's temperature, the reason you got your temperature and what reason it went up, and that's like ding, 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 you should have sex, is because that's when you ovulate. So you ovulate, your body temperature goes up, and that's when your egg releases. So that's the luteal phase. It's the beginning of the luteal phase is the ovulatory phase. Okay. Give me a second. So there are estrogen and progesterone levels that change during each phase, right? They're basically inverse, like I was talking about the other day. That doesn't matter too much, but what is going to matter is basically insulin and kind of just like energy levels and hunger and metabolism, okay? So your energy, your body temperature goes up the second phase, so you actually can eat a little bit more food because your metabolism does boost up. On that, your hunger is also going to increase that second. So it's easy, like, hey, I'm not saying like eat a lot more. A lot of people hear that like, oh, I can eat. Dylan said to eat more. I'm talking about like 100, 200 calories max. Like, it's not that much more. It's like a tablespoon of peanut butter. So when I say more, it's relative, right? I'm talking about like 100, 200 calories there, right? Your energy levels are also going to be shit during your luteal phase before you get your period. So that's what it's important to change up your macros based on that, so you can feel better energy and just feel overall better. All right. So let's talk about protein. All right. How do we adjust that through phase? With our clients, the follicular phase, you actually want a little bit higher protein because you are going to be, this is like your push during your workouts. So if you're matching your training up, we have our clients push really, really hard their first 2 weeks. So they'll use what I was calling yesterday, talking about progressive overload. They're using heavier weights. They're doing more compound exercise like deadlift, squats, bench press, that type of thing that are more taxing on your nervous system. You're going to need a little more protein intake. So I recommend between 0.6 to 1.1. So obviously on that phase, you'd want to 0.6 to 1.1 grams per pound of body weight. So if you're 130 pound women, 1 gram per pound of body weight would be 130 grams, right? And so you could do the math there, but I would recommend toward the higher end on that, obviously, in the first 2 phases, because you are going to be pushed, and that's going to be really, really important. And then the ovulatory phase, the luteal phase, you can still actually increase it if you need to, but this is going to be more towards satiation and curbing any cravings, right? So there's just that effect, because higher protein does satiate you more, and it does decrease your cravings quite a bit. So if you want to go high and then a little bit higher, you can, but typically we want to keep it pretty high in that follicular phase. If you're having crazy cravings and you just can't fight them off and you're hungry all the time, then yeah, you can boost your protein in the second phase. But otherwise, if you're not, which a lot of women don't have that as intensely, you can actually decrease it a little bit less than the follicular phase, because you're not pushing your workouts as hard. Okay. Now, carbohydrates. So obviously carbs have a huge role in energy and just overall mood regulation. However, we want to make sure that we are aligning these with your actual insulin sensitivity and resistance. So insulin sensitivity is highest during the follicular phase, this first 2 weeks. Insulin resistance is higher the luteal phase, right before you get your period. So that's when it's really important to moderate your carbohydrates, which I'll get into how to do that actually inversely based on your fat intake. But that's when we want to focus on moderating a little bit lower on your carbohydrates, which will make you less insulin resistant. So the carbs that you are eating are not going to just storm as fat. Okay. The follicular phase, we obviously want to increase those carbs. How you do that is you basically just, whatever your protein is, you just keep that pretty uniform. And then you would decrease your fat intake to 25% of overall calories. So if you're eating, let's say, 1,000 calories, you're never going to eat 1,000 calories, but just for my math purposes, that would be 250 calories coming from fat, and the rest would be coming from carbohydrates, which would help you moderate those. Okay. So I use 25% and 35%. Basically, luteal phase, you're looking at 35% of overall intake coming from fats, and that will push your carbs down. And during the follicular phase, those first 2 weeks, you're looking at 25% of your fats overall intake, and that will push your carbs a little bit higher when you are more insulin sensitive. Okay. Now, fats. So fats obviously have a huge effect on hormone production, satiety. I wouldn't recommend going any lower than like 40 grams per day. So if your calories are like really, really low, and that's like where your fat ends up, you need to add more cardio and more output so you can eat more food and get those macros up, because that's gonna be too little for your actual hormonal production. Okay. So we basically, like I was saying before, we want to basically 35 and 25%. Depending on the phase. So obviously 35% is during the luteal phase, 25% is going to be the follicular phase. And you can use an app like MyFitnessPal. And that's what I'm going to get into next, is how to track this all, right? So we have our protein, 0.6 to 1.1 grams per pound of body weight. We have the changes between the 2 phases of your menstrual cycle. So the first 2 weeks, you're at 25% of overall intake coming from fats. At the luteal phase, right before you get your period, for the last 2 weeks, you're looking at 35% of overall intake coming from fats. Okay. So how do we set this up? So go to MyFitnessPal, go to settings. I would recommend getting the premium version. It's just better. And you set your macros that way. So 0.6 to 1.1, once you put the amount of protein in grams that you're going to need there, then you're going to basically scroll over to the carbohydrates, the fats part, dial that up to 35% or 25%, depending on where you are in your cycle. And you want to make sure that you are tracking this with surgical precision, because the average person underestimates by about, I don't know, I think they research they underestimate by 50%, which sends you into basically a calorie surplus. So like, why am I not losing weight? It's like, oh, because you're not like weighing your food out, and like you don't know exactly what's in there. So my client Steph, we did this with her. We've done this with my client Caitlin. Caitlin now She almost hip thrusts more than I do. So hip thrusts, barbell hip thrusts, shoulders up on a bench, bridging up with your glutes. She hip thrusts like 315 pounds per reps. That is a shitload of weight. And how we did that was by leveraging her training with her menstrual cycle and her nutrition with her menstrual cycle. So she's eating a ton of food. She's lifting super heavy. She's 125 pounds. She's like very, very small. Same thing like client Steph. She's very, very lean now, and so now we're able to do a lot more interesting things, but we're able to actually switch her carbohydrates and her fats, keep her protein relatively the same throughout both cycles, and she's able to see some really, really, really good fat loss with our approach that we got her down to. So if you're interested in having this all DFY done for you, DM me Metabolic AF on Instagram at Dylan A. Conrad for more information on my Metabolic as Female method, because if you are doing a program that is not female specific and you're doing a program that is not specific to your menstrual cycle and you have a menstrual cycle, you're on the wrong one. You're going to see very slow results or no results at all, right? Yes, men do lose weight faster than women, but that is on a gross scale. Relatively, that should not be true whatsoever. So anyways, love you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and happy whatever day you're listening to.